Good to see you all as you're coming in the room here. See lots of well-seasoned advocates amongst the group. Appreciate you showing up still. We can always keep learning. As you come in, if you would like to introduce yourself in the chat, I invite you to do so. You can put your name, pronouns, the native land that you're calling in on. If you want to include your faith, tradition, or community, if you know your district, give a little bio there. Feel free. Maybe you'll learn about some other people in your district as well. But we've got good representation across the state I'm already seeing. So this is awesome.
Oh, no.
I hear a young advocate. Love it. It might be Samuel. Is that Anna's Samuel?
Yep, that's not on mute yet. That's my 2-year-old.
Yay. We do this work for you, buddy. Awesome. We got a few still coming in. Thank you for putting in your intros. Hi, Celia. I saw your wave.
Where do you put, how do you put your intros in? It's been so long for me.
Oh, in the chat button down on the bottom of your Zoom taskbar.
I click it. Okay. And then what happens?
And then there should be a box that pops up and you can write in that.
Okay. Oh, you mean just in the chat box?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought because see, mine says Brian Reed, but yours says Sister Jessica Zimmerly. So, oh, I can do. Okay.
Brian is I know on Whidbey with the fearless Whidbey faithful advocates from the Greening Congregations Collaborative there. We often used to make a pilgrimage
down here is also from our
Olympia.
Greening congregation.
Yeah, it's Celia, yes.
Okay, so I take my phone down.
Oh, I see. Daniel, thank you for your introduction. Excited that you're here. I am a PLU graduate, so go Lutz. And I love first-time advocates joining us, so that's great. And I'm glad that it was shared through your class. That's awesome. Okay, well, let's get started. We have a fair amount to go through today. So welcome. My name is Sister Jessica Zimmerly. I am the Advocacy Director at Earth Ministry, Washington Interfaith Power and Light. We'll do some introductions, but before I go much further, I want to pause for our land acknowledgement. So this is a practice that Earth Ministry WAIPL takes very seriously as part of our efforts to be in good solidarity with Indigenous peoples. So we work within the unceded territories of many different Northwest Native nations. And the Earth Ministry office is on the traditional land of the First People of Seattle, the Duwamish, people past, present, and future. And we do this practice of land acknowledgement together just as one way to resist erasure of Indigenous histories, as well as to honor tribes and the land itself that they continue to steward. I encourage you to take a moment to send out gratitude to the first stewards of your land. Many of you put that in with your intro in the chat, and there's also a resource that we can drop in the chat that can help you find what native land you are on if you don't know yet. Well, welcome. It is good to be together, and you may have seen an announcement that came out yesterday sharing that I am in a bittersweet place of transition and will be moving on from Earth Ministry WAIPL at the end of this month. It's not easy for me, and it feels like it's okay and it's right. And I know that you all are the heart of our work and will carry it on. And I'm so grateful that I've gotten to do this work with you since I was at PLU, and started here in 2013, which is wild. It has been, more than I ever could have dreamt it would be when I started. And much of that is thanks to you all, regardless if I've known you the whole time or if we're just meeting. So just naming that as perhaps an elephant that is in the room, and want to say thank you for the outpouring of support that has come into my inbox over the last 24 hours. So appreciate you all. I am not the only one from staff here tonight, so I want to do a quick roundabout with my colleagues. I also want to just shout out to board and former board members in the room. So thank you. Involved in various ways over the years. We're glad you're here. And I'll hand it over to AC to introduce themselves.
Hey y'all, I am AC Churchill. I'm the Executive Director of Earth Ministry, Washington Interfaith Power and Light. It is so good to have you all with us this evening. And I'm bringing you greetings from Tacoma, the land of the Puyallup people. And Maddie, you available?
Hi, everyone. I'm Maddie Smith. I am the Operations Manager at Earth Ministry WAIPL, and my pronouns are they, them. And I'm calling in right now from Duwamish land in North Seattle. And I will pass it on to Kate.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kate Strathy. I am the Program Associate at Earth Ministry and also the Seattle Service Corps intern. Very excited about that and very happy to be here.
Thanks, y'all. So that is our team for tonight. You're just missing Kia, then we'd have the whole crew here. So I will be pulling up slides, and this will be kind of more of a presentation tonight. There's a lot that I'd like to share with you all, but I will pause throughout to see if there's questions as we go along. But before we pull up any slides, I love seeing so many of you on camera. So I would love to just get kind of a temperature check for how you feel about legislative advocacy, like by using what we call like the 5-finger method. So we have 5 fingers, right? A 0 would be, I've never done any advocacy and I'm very scared about it. A 5 would be super confident, let's go. So that's the extreme ends of this spectrum. If you could kind of indicate to me kind of what your comfort level is using your fingers, that will kind of just give me a read on what our entry point is here. And it is okay and great if you are a 0 or a 1 or 2 or on that lower side of things. Let's see. We've got a good spread. Okay, I got to go to my second page. Okay, this is great. I see a lot of seasoned advocates and newer folks to learn with us. So I'm going to try to provide with that kind of a bit of a broad overview, but we will get to the specifics. And those of you who I know are here to hear about our bills for this year's legislative session, don't worry, we will save time for that. With that, thank you, everybody. Maddie, can you pull up our slide deck, please? And I'll say while Maddie's getting that up, the great thing and what I love about doing advocacy as a person of faith is that you do not have to know everything to show up and participate. The core thing we need to know is our values and what our spiritual traditions teach us to be good and how we love our neighbors. That is what we focus on. We try to do our advocacy in a way that's very faith forward, meaning that we're bringing those values out front and leading with them. And that's a gift we contribute to the overall environmental justice movement. So remember that if you get at all intimidated along the way. And what we have to start here is just kind of our roadmap. So this is what I've planned out for us this evening. We'll talk about what faithful advocacy is. We'll be focusing on it within a legislative context here in Washington State, but you can apply that elsewhere. But this training will look more locally. We will then talk more about what it looks like in action and then share our priorities. And be sure that you all get to practice by signing in for a bill before we log off tonight. So let's get started. First slide, please. Okay, so Maddie, you can bring up all the text. Great. So this, I'm gonna kind of go through some of this quickly, but I'm happy to share the slide deck. We'll send out an email to participants when we're done with this event. But just kind of differentiating faithful advocacy from a secular approach to advocacy. So what makes faithful advocacy difference? We're still speaking up to influence our social and political institutions, but we're doing that based on our religious values, our spiritual traditions. We're addressing the root causes through public policy reform, but we're doing that with the goal of co-creating a just and loving society. And there's democracy in action, but then there's also faith in action. So we see this as a central component across faith traditions of how we show up as people of faith in the world. Next slide, please. Okay, so just to get it out of the way, there's sometimes questions about what a faith community can or cannot engage in. So your house of worship has the same lobby guidelines as Earth Ministry WAIPL does. We are all 501c3 nonprofits. So what we cannot do is partisan politics. So that means candidate stuff, anything involving people and telling people to vote for people is where the line is drawn. Please click, Maddie. Sorry, I forgot that I put these nifty transitions in. What we can do is the nonpartisan engagement. So that includes taking a position on a bill, a ballot measure, an issue, educating others, mobilizing folks to ask, to act, talking to our electeds and asking for their leadership, and doing the same with agencies. The one piece that is kind of in between is doing candidate forums. So you can have candidate forums, you just have to treat all candidates impartially. So we can all do this kind of legislative advocacy that we're going to talk about tonight. Next slide, please. Okay, and just some basic attributes of faithful advocacy that we're going to be bringing forward as we talk about our bills with our electeds. So first and foremost, our faithful advocacy is values-based. So like I said, we're really trying to show up in that faith-forward way and kind of get out of the head and into the heart. And that's where we really see actual change happen, and dialogue that can move people happens more through a good story than through kind of dumping facts at somebody. With those values we're bringing forward, justice and equity is at the core. And we also bring an element of hope. So that's something I think is really important and has sustained me over the years, is knowing that, we're all part of a big puzzle, and having hope and faith that the arc of the universe does bend towards justice. A couple of other pieces our advocacy does as people of faith is really create opportunities to build bridges, so we can have more dialogue and collaboration at times, especially in our incredibly divisive climate these days. Oftentimes Earth Ministry WAIPL can get meetings with legislators that are more challenging for our partners at the Sierra Club to secure, for example, because we know that representatives' faith tradition, and we kind of are a different entry point into the conversation through our faith values. We also see awesome collaboration coming together. I think one of my favorite over the years is how Earth Ministry WAIPL brought together the Washington State Catholic Conference and Planned Parenthood to work together on a bill on toxic chemical reform and getting BPA out of baby bottles, right? So bringing folks together, I think, is a gift we offer. And finally, I think doing this faithful advocacy is something you can do in your spiritual community. And that I think is empowering. You know, I know a lot of you are kind of the key people at your congregation, and you might bring the information you hear tonight back to your green team or to your pastor, rabbi, to folks in your adult education or coffee hours, right? So we do this work together, which amplifies our message and also sustains our spirits. Okay, next, please. And then lastly here, just a bit about the impact of our faithful advocacy. So I think it's always important to remember that elected officials work for you. You got them into office, maybe, or their job once they're in office is to represent you. And so they need to hear from you in order to do that. I know it's easy to be jaded with the process and the politics, but it doesn't actually take a ton to move somebody. So one of my favorite fun facts is that 7 contacts is enough to create change, moving a decision maker up or down a notch, kind of along a spectrum. So not going from a no vote to a yes vote, but maybe it's they hadn't heard about a bill, and then they hear from 7 people and they say, oh, I should look that up and learn more about what's going on. Or maybe they were, it just wasn't a priority for them, but they thought they would vote yes anyways. And hearing from 7 people is enough for them to say, wow, I think I should be more of a champion here. And this seems important to my constituents. So 7 phone calls, emails, stories that you share, really do make a difference. And we've heard directly from state legislators, especially, that your stories are like a resource to them. Your stories offer them something that they can go and share with their colleagues and share on the floor when a vote's coming up and say, you know, I heard this from my constituents who came all the way from Whidbey Island and took the ferry to get here because it was so important to them that we look at toxic chemicals in a really systemic way. So the stories give them tools to keep using. And then these last pieces are, you know, we're providing a moral anchor for the issues that are being talked about. They're going to be talked about regardless of if we show up or not. But when we show up, we add that that moral element to the conversation. It complements our individual actions. So we think as people of faith, we do what we can in our homes and in our houses of worship, but we also need to work on the systemic level. It's kind of a both and situation there. And like I said before, it's central to an active faith. I'm going to pause there because that's just our quick overview. Does anyone have a question about kind of what makes faithful advocacy unique before we dive into more of the specifics about our context in Washington State? I see some awesome stuff in the chat. Chris sharing 30 letters from his parish, St. Pat's, helped convince a national decision maker that led to farm workers getting their union created, right? Like 30 people coming together can really make a difference, a real difference in the lives of many. Thank you for sharing that story. I love hearing success stories like that. Okay, so we'll keep moving on here. So we're going to kind of get into the section of just the refresher for some, perhaps, of what our advocacy looks like in a legislative setting. So here's our Government 101 reminder chart, or doesn't have to be a reminder, but you know, sometimes it's been a while since high school civics. I know for me, it sure has. So we have our 3 branches of government, and then we also have levels of government. So we've got the branches of the legislative, executive, judicial. Legislative is the one that we are focusing on in this season, but Earth Ministry WAIPL does advocacy year long, and it shows up in a variety of different ways. So we do work across all of these different branches, but right now we're focusing most on legislative, and we're focusing on this middle row, which is the state level. But you can see kind of the movement is the legislative passes the laws, executive carries it out. That would include the agencies that are under the executive branch. So Department of Ecology is one that we're often in conversation with. And then the judicial branch is interpreting the laws and upholding them. Next, please. Okay, any fans of Schoolhouse Rock out there? I see some hands. Yeah, I'm not going to sing for you, but you might hear the song in your head of I'm Just a Bill. So this is the process through which a bill becomes a law here in Washington state. And so we begin, and where we are now, I should say, is only 4 days into the legislative session. So we're in this very early portion with things being introduced, bills being introduced and going to their policy committees. So a bill is introduced and the first reading, and that is in a committee that is relevant or topical to what the bill's focus is. Often our bills end up in the environment and energy committees, but sometimes it's in other committees, because the work we do, of course, is intersectional. So we might see it show up in transportation or housing or healthcare. And that's determined. I actually don't know who makes the first call on that, but someone determines that, and then we look and see where it shows up, and that's where we focus our advocacy. So you'll see that there will be public hearings popping up. That's what we are going to be focusing on here in the first few weeks. And your opportunities to weigh in during those will continue to be remote accessible, which is great. Before the pandemic, we had to be in Olympia for this, which was really a barrier, of course. So we're grateful for the opportunity to sign in from anywhere across the state. And Kate will be walking through how to do that with you later. There's also opportunities to testify. So if you're somebody who really would like to testify at a public hearing, often Earth Ministry does that work kind of with our coalition partners. They'll say when they're looking to build a group of diverse folks to bring their stories forward. So let us know if that's something that you are interested in doing. I would say hold off. I wouldn't encourage everyone to go out and sign up to testify every time you see a public hearing. The reason for that is because the process has a timeline, right? So if bills have so many people signed up to testify that their hearing has to get extended to a second day, that could actually put the bill at risk of getting through the process, getting voted on and out before the deadline happens. So there's a deadline for each of these committees. The policy committee is the first one. So, we want to share our stories and speak our truths, but know when it makes most sense to just sign in and send a personal note to your senator or representative, especially if they sit on this committee, which I'll show you how to look up. And then sign-ins are the big way we show kind of mass support. And then you'll see executive sessions will come up on the bill schedule. I'll show you what that looks like in a minute, but that means that they're going to be voting on the bill. So that's another prime time to contact your legislator, is if you see that they are in a committee that is going to be voting on one of our bills soon. If a bill passes out of its its policy committee, it goes on to its fiscal committee, and that's if there's an associated cost. Most often there is a fiscal note, they call it, attached to a bill. Sometimes it takes quite a while for that to get figured out. So we have to wait a bit at times, but usually this will be a conversation where we show up and say, yes, it is worth the money to protect our climate and communities. Yes, we need to make these investments in a way that's just and equitable. Yes, industry can manage, but the people really need this, right? In the Senate, that committee is called the Ways and Means Committee. In the House, it's called the Appropriations Committee. I don't know why they don't just use the same name, but those are the ones to look for. And if it passes out of its fiscal committee, our bill will then go to the Rules Committee, and they kind of are negotiating when it will get scheduled for the floor vote. So they'll place a bill on basically on standby to be ready and get on the schedule, and then there'll be the floor vote. And so that's where there'll be discussion, and hopefully the bill will be passed and voted on. And then guess what? It gets to do it all again in the opposite chamber. So if the bill was introduced in the House and it passes on the House floor, then it goes back to the Senate and starts in the Policy Committee and has to go through all 3 steps again to get to the floor of the Senate. There's a reconciliation process. If different amendments happen along the way, it gets kind of wonky, but we follow along and try to cheer along our bills through all these steps to get it eventually to the governor's desk, where he has the option to sign the bill into law, veto it, or do a partial veto, which is something we've seen a bit more of recently with some of our bills. I will say our bills all at the beginning, I forgot to mention that they'll be introduced in both chambers, most likely. So there's a House bill and a Senate bill, and they're the same bill as they start out. It's basically to increase their odds of moving through the process, is why they introduce it twice or in either chamber. As the session goes along, we'll start to see one pick up more momentum from the other, and those prime sponsors of the bills, meaning the legislator that introduced them, will probably be in conversation and say, yeah, it looks like the House bill's going on, like, let's focus on that, and kind of let the other one fizzle out and not pass a cutoff date. So for now, we have 2 bill numbers for most of the bills in our top priorities. Okay. Let me pause. Actually, Maddie, can I share my screen for a minute? Thanks. So before we go on, can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so this is our legislature's website. It is just leg.wa.gov. And so I just want to point out a few places that I go to a lot on this website that might be helpful for you. So to start, we have our menu here on the left. We have a district finder. So this is very helpful, especially because there was redistricting recently. I know at least Maddie on our staff was surprised to see that they're in a different district now. So you just put in your address and click Find My District. And here we are. So this is Earth Ministry WAIPL's office, but we fall within the 36th legislative district. You can see here who our senator and our 2 representatives are. You can play with the map. It's pretty fun. So you can zoom out and kind of click around. So you can see, oh, on the other side of Green Lake, who's there in the 46th. You can also click through these names and learn more about your electeds. So I'm going to look at Liz Berry because she's a great champion for our environmental justice work. So this is the roster page, and you can see here some basic information, but what I really look for is what committees they sit on. So if you notice that your legislative representative, senator, is on the Environment Committee in particular, that's one to note, because many of our bills will be going through their offices, and we want to either thank them for their leadership if they're really involved, or encourage them to have stronger leadership. I'm going to go back home here. The other places that I go to a lot is here with the bill information. So this will show you kind of how a bill progresses. And I'm actually going to bring up a bill that we worked on last year that we're bringing back, has a different bill number this year, but 1099 is a climate bill that we worked on last year. And I'm going to pull this up to show you kind of what I was saying with that process of going through the different steps. So you can see here that it was introduced and sent to the Environment Committee in the House. It's then passed. You can click through and see the majority report and see if your representative is one who voted for it, and you can send them a thank you note. That's always great to do after a vote. And it got sent to Appropriations, which is the Fiscal Committee, like I mentioned, and it went through, passed there as well. You can look again at the vote. And then eventually it got to the floor, and it'll say the yays and nays of how it fared overall. And then it went back to the Senate side. Because this was a multi-year bill, this is actually from 2021. You can see it again in 2022 when it was reintroduced. This year it is a different bill number because it's a new biennium and it's kind of our budget process. So our state legislature goes on a 2-year cycle with our budgets, and the biennial budget is the big budget. That's this year, which is why our legislative session, gosh, I'm kind of tripping all over my words. Sorry about that tonight, y'all. That's why our legislative session is longer. So it goes into April this year, whereas on the non-budget years, it's shorter. So it's a marathon versus a sprint.
That's heavy.
Okay, I think you can play around a lot more in here. You could be looking at the committee rosters, but I think I'll leave that to you. I mostly wanted you to know where to go to track the bills. I also want you to see, while I have my screen up, our handy dandy Earth Ministry WAIPL legislative webpage. So if you go to our homepage, you'll see it here right away. Click through, and we've got all of our bills here. And Kate is being awesome at helping us update this every morning, start of day. So we will put in what we see show up on that portal on the legislature's website into Earth Ministry WAIPL's page so that you don't have to do all of the clicking through. So you can also just bookmark this, which I'll drop in the chat, and visit it to see how things are moving along. And we'll get into these bills later, like I said, but just want you to know that that's a place you can go if that legislative website is intimidating, because it's, I would say, not the most user-friendly of all websites. Any questions on how a bill becomes a law? Process? Looking good? Oh, I see Dave waving. Yeah.
Hi, Jessica. Thanks so much. So yeah, thanks for the overview of the legislation. And maybe you're going to talk about this, but as you know, this year is a big year for budget items. Will you be talking about that?
So we are focusing mostly on policy bills, though we do have some budget priorities that you'll see on Earth Ministry WAIPL's website. I would say overall that the budget is very important, and it's just a lot more of an inside game than a grassroots process. It's really something that happens rapidly, and it's a lot of conversations, and you really have to have like a registered lobbyist on the ground in Olympia to keep up with it, which is not the case for us at Earth Ministry WAIPL. So we're going to follow along on some budget priorities around climate and salmon recovery. And there are budget committees that we can weigh in on. So there might be times that we mobilize y'all around that this session, but especially given that I'll be transitioning out and will be a little bit below our normal level of capacity for a while, we decided to focus on our policy bills this year because they're just easier to be actively involved in tracking and participating in. Okay. Maddie, let's go back up. I have one more slide kind of to share what our advocacy actions then look like. Here's a picture from the before times of a full hearing room in Olympia, which is a grand time. I think that is going to be a possibility again this year. If you are comfortable going to public spaces, you can go down to Olympia and be there for hearings once again. I will say my understanding is the campus is going to be a bit more closed off overall. So before you could kind of wander the halls and go to the office by office, and now you have to have appointments to go to actual offices of legislators. It's the first time we're back to having the public be invited to be there. These are just different ways that we take action. So there's always meetings with your elected officials. Some of you might want to participate in the meetings that are set up through Interfaith Advocacy Day, which is led by our partners at the Faith Action Network. They set up meetings, they try to get them in every legislative district. And so that's a cool way to go show up with other faith community members. We also will kind of schedule out strategic meetings if we have a target and we know we have folks of faith in their district. But the main way I would say is through kind of staying in touch via email communication and writing to your elected officials, telling them what you care about. Their email addresses are all on that roster page that I showed you, and sharing your stories in that space with them, and sending them the thank you notes, not just the asks. They get asked to do a lot, but appreciation also can give a morale boost, as I'm sure you know. And then the easiest way, if you don't have a lot of time, is to call the Washington Legislative Hotline. So this is a really neat tool that is available in our state. It is just a phone number that you call and you talk to a kind operator on the other end who takes your stance on a bill down and will send that to all three of your legislators. And you can also ask to have the governor's office included. So you just tell them your address and they confirm what district you're in. And then you say, I'm calling about this specific bill, have the bill number ready, and say that you would really like them to vote yes on it because it aligns with our faith values of stewardship and sustainability and justice. And that's something really important to you and your faith community at Ballard First Lutheran Church. You don't get to share as much of your story in that setting. You kind of have to be a little bit of a broken record. Like I would say that you're a person of faith at least twice, because then they might note that in the note that they send. But it will definitely get your stance through. And that's important because the aides for each legislator take really like a tally of what bills they're hearing about. So when I said kind of that 7 contacts, that's part of it, is having a strong tally. I think, it might take more than 7 tallies. Those are kind of less personal points of contact, but if something is popping up a lot, it is much more likely to make it to the desk of the legislator themselves. And I will also say, like, if you are in a meeting and you talk to an aide, like the aides hold so much power in really controlling what is on the agenda. So don't take that as like a not as good situation. I think sometimes it can feel like a bummer when you want to speak to your senator themselves, but the aide is really oftentimes more cued in on the variety of bills that are moving. I mentioned signing in at hearings. So we have multiple hearing options in the different committees. That will be the main actions you see coming through Earth Ministry WAIPL, is asking you to click through and sign in at specific times. We do have a opt-in option for if you want to be informed more frequently than our general mailing list about actions you can take that will often include sign-ins. And so I'm going to ask Kate if you can drop that link to signing up for that opt-in email into the chat. Kate will be sending out those notes at the start of each week. And then these aren't always as applicable to the state legislature. You can submit written comments before a hearing. They're not always looked at, but they're reported out when the clerk will report how many people have signed in and how many comments have come in. Sometimes legislators will have town halls throughout session. It's a long session, so that's likely. So that would be a local event where they're coming to talk to their constituents, and you can speak up there and say, hey, environmental justice is like the top issue for me, and I need to see you lead on that. And then I think it's really important to remember that part of taking action is spreading awareness in your community. So doing what you can with your faith community to bring them into the process as well. Okay, any questions? I think we can keep the slides up, Maddie. Okay, so most importantly, we're trying to tell our story when we show up as faithful advocates. So this is my handy dandy recipe for you with 3 parts to help you remember telling your story on when, you know, you might not have the time to do our full storytelling worksheet, which is something else that Earth Ministry WAIPL offers. And I can include that in our email follow-up. But the basics you want to convey are, who are you, what do you value, and what do you want? So when we start with who we are, it's sharing multiple parts of our identity. So first is what your personal connection is to the issue. Maybe you're avid fisherman, or a grandmother, or a teacher who hears kids talking about climate change in school, you know, bringing up something about you, somebody who likes to go on walks and be able to breathe clean air, right? Something like that, that brings forward why you care about this. And also your communal identity. So this is where we say, you know, I'm a person of faith and I am an active member at Prospect UCC. I see Megan here on my screen. Hey. And so that, you know, says, well, for one thing, be careful with your word choice. And I would say you are a member of. So you don't want to speak on behalf of your community in a formal way if that's not authorized by your leadership. But you can say you're a member of this church, this synagogue. And by doing so, you're indicating that you're part of a group of people that come together around shared values. And there's likely other people who think similarly in your community, and also, frankly, who vote. People of faith have a high voter turnout. So we're kind of amplified in that way. So share a bit about who you are, and then get into your story and what you value. So this is where you pick 1 or 2 concrete values to share. They could be things like justice and equity, stewardship and sustainability, simplicity, responsibility, care for future generations. So bringing forward for you what pulls your heartstring about this issue, and wrap a story around it, and say why you kind of connect that to your lived experience. And then finally, what you want. So this is the big picture of the future that you want to see, and that we want to co-create together. So, you know, not just passing this bill, but we want to see a future where communities can thrive and environmental justice is incorporated in with all of our planning for our cities, right? And so the specific ask there is that the planning piece be added in, the climate planning piece. But the future you want to see, that big picture, is really thriving space for people without high rates of asthma or flooding or toxic chemical pollution. So I'll just give a really brief example of how I would do this with one of our bills. And I'll do that actually. I'm going to do that after I tell you about the bill, so you know what I'm talking about. So let's move along to that. Okay, so here are the bills that we selected for this year's legislative session. Hooray, we're going to walk through, there's 3, and we're going to walk through them. I will say that we come up with these very mindfully in many different coalition conversations that we participate in. We take kind of all that information from places like the Environmental Priorities Coalition, from looking at the leadership of Front and Centered, which is a frontline community-led coalition that we really respect. Our work with the Toxic Free Legacy Coalition, so Earth Ministry WAIPL shows up in all of these different spaces of the environmental community. And we hear kind of what is bubbling up, and then we discern where we think the faith community can make a good splash and what aligns with our values as an organization and community. So the first focus area is around climate. And this is looking at updating our Growth Management Act. We've talked about the Growth Management Act for a few years now. It is something that was created in 1990 and is really looking at how cities and counties grow. So requiring comprehensive plans, land use planning, to be sure that the growth of a city isn't overly impacting the ecosystems. There are 13 elements of the GMA, and those are all considered within these plans. And so what we are wanting is to add a couple more elements, because as it's focused a lot more on ecosystems, and we want to bring in, we care for both creation and communities, right? So we want to bring in the reality of our changing climate and the impact it has on communities and how that shows up disproportionately to those most vulnerable. So our two pieces that we're working on, first is a climate piece. This is the continuation of what we worked on the last 2 years. So if you remember how I showed you House Bill 1099, that is this bill. It's got new numbers. So we've got 1811 and 5203. And I've put in our prime sponsors. So if those are your representative or senator, good to give them a thank you at this point. But what it does is require cities and counties to really add an element of resilience planning around climate. And so that's looking at mitigating and protecting against impacts of climate change that we're seeing more and more, like through wildfires, drought, landslides, floods, sea level rise, heat island increases, all of that. It also looks to reduce emissions through transportation, which is our largest polluting sector in Washington. And so it includes a component of building more livable communities that just don't rely exclusively on cars. So making cities more walkable, bikeable, and transit accessible. The second piece is proposed and put forward by Front and Centered, and it's all about environmental justice. So you might recall that one of our legislative priorities a few years back was the HEAL Act, H-E-A-L, and that's a healthy environment for all. We passed it, hooray, which is awesome. And basically what that did was codify environmental justice into our state law. And this bill, which we don't have a number for yet, but we'll get it up on our website as soon as we do. It basically takes the HEAL Act and makes it apply to cities and counties as well as the state. So it's really looking at requiring that environmental justice is explicitly addressed and that it's done so in a way that meaningfully reduces health disparities and also has good public participation and communication with folks. That is really important and part of our core justice framework that we're really leaning into at Earth Ministry WAIPL. I've had some questions of, why aren't they combined into one bill? And Front and Centered has been talking about that to say that for them, it's very important that the environmental justice piece be separate and kind of given the platform that it deserves, because so often frontline communities are kind of treated as an afterthought in these conversations. And so we want that instead for that to be its own piece of the GMA and the priority. I saw our other things pop up for a minute. Let's go on to our next bill. Okay, so this is another second year bill. This is the WRAP Act, which last year we called Renew Act. I like this name a lot more. Bye, Kim, I see you leaving. There will be a recording of this available, by the way, so you can catch the rest later. And so the WRAP Act is looking at modernizing our recycling system, which is desperately needed here in Washington State. We have about, I think it's like 50% of things that are put in packaging and paper products that don't actually end up getting recycled. So what this does is establish a system that puts the responsibility on manufacturers, on the producers of consumer products, specifically for packaging and paper products. And it kind of incentivizes them through a fee scale based on how easily a product can be reused, composted, or recycled. So we want to see the products that we're using have a longer life cycle. We want to see a more standardized system of recycling across the state, which this would create. That's, I think, a really important component, because right now there's different levels of accessibility to curbside recycling depending on where you live. It would also, the funding from this would be used for infrastructure improvements and creating a really clear list of what to recycle, which I don't know about you, but like if I had that, I would tape it to my fridge and look at it all the time. So that's the future we want to see. The only difference between this year and last year is that it may include a beverage container deposit system. So that's like we had when I was growing up in California, my grandfather always saved our soda cans, and you could go drop them off and you get like 5 cents per can, right? So they're looking at a 10-cent system here where it would cost 10 cents more to get anything in a plastic bottle, but then when you went and deposited it, you would get 10 cents back. Okay, let's do our last bill. This is another bill that we're running for a second year that I'm really excited about and hopeful that will pass this year. The Toxic Free Cosmetics Act, House Bill 1047, is all about looking at cleaning up what we put on our bodies. So what it will do is ban hazardous chemicals, things that we know are no good, very bad, and have been talking about as a community, like PFAS, formaldehyde, lead, things that you're like, what? That can't be in makeup. Totally, sadly is. And we don't want to see that. So we're looking to phase that out by 2025. It also includes pieces about like informational gaps on the hazards of these products being absorbed into our skin, and incentives for businesses to switch. But most of all, for us, this is an environmental justice concern because you see a lot higher load of toxicity in products that are marketed to and used most often by women of color. And so that's kind of a situation across the spectrum with toxic chemicals. We see them most frequently showing up in vulnerable communities, and that is unjust and something that we want to change, of course. Okay. I will say that there will be a lot more time to talk about these bills. This is just, remember, first week of session. And so I'll be teaching on them at the Eastern Washington Legislative Conference next weekend. We'll be teaching on them at the Interfaith Advocacy Day, environmental breakouts. So as more information comes up, you'll hear more from us about the specifics of these bills. But really remembering, going back to where I started, like you just need to know like your values and how they relate to these topics, right? Like, so yeah, we want to see good planning around climate. And we want to see environmental justice included with that. Yeah, we don't want more stuff going to landfills. Like that's not in line with faith values. And we don't want to be poisoning people, right? So we know those things to be true. We trust these are good vehicles that our partners and who have really heavy policy staff have been really working on developing. And so now we need to elevate them. So I'll do a quick example of how I share my story. And so if I were to go and testify at this hearing, I might say something like this. Let me give it some thought. You can certainly prepare your testimony more than I am currently doing also. So you can write it out and read from it. Usually you'll have up to 2 minutes. But just off the top of my head, here we go. My name is Sister Jessica Zimmerly. I am a person of faith, a minister in the Lutheran tradition, and I am going to be an aunt for the first time, and that's really exciting for me. And I am very active in the Earth Ministry WAIPL community. I also go to Ballard First Lutheran Church, where we've had a lot of conversations about our role as stewards of creation. And so one thing I'm really looking at is how we plan for our future and what my incoming nephew is going to inherit. And, you know, I'm somebody who really likes to make a good plan and have checklists. And I know that things are going to get more and more unpredictable. So, you know, right now my family is in the Central Valley of California, which is underwater. And the floods there are really unprecedented. And my grandma is having to have neighbors come and help her put sandbags in front of her garage door, right? And so we need to be looking at how we put into place plans for resilience for us to be able to weather the storms that are to come, as we also improve how we are caring for our climate. And this climate update to the Growth Management Act is one way that we can do that. So I really ask for your support of Senate Bill 5203. I want to see that future where we have good planning in place so that we can be caring for one another in a good way. And I really appreciate your leadership to help get us there by voting yes on Senate Bill 5203. Thank you. So you'll see the pieces of that recipe in there, right? Of who am I, different identifiers, the values and the story, and then the ask with the big picture vision and the specific piece. Okay, Marjorie is asking, how important is it to keep track of what action I've taken online? You know, we're all human, and you probably will double up at times, and that's okay. It shows you really care, if anything. The sign-ins will get rather long. You know, like for some of the bigger bills, like it'll be like 10 pages of sign-ins. So if your name ends up on there twice, like we aren't encouraging you to go sign up twice, but if you end up doing that, it's okay. What was I going to add? With that piece around organization as well, you can get creative there. So I kind of like to be a little rebel and just say person of faith, right? See, there's someone just put that in the chat. Or godmother or grandparent or sibling or someone with asthma, or, you know, you could bring out that piece of your identity in that piece of the sign-in form because that they do show up. And so you can also click through and see if you want to look at the sign-ins, you can see who is signed in, which is always kind of fun to do. We did that for our first bill that we did some sign-ins for on Monday, which was which bill was that? The toxics bill.
Cosmetics. Don't
And I just want to like shout out to you all. Like I think Earth Ministry WAIPL was like 20% of the total sign-ins for the bill. It was awesome to see so many familiar names and people of faith. So I appreciate that. I see Gary has got his hand up. What's up, Gary?
Well, congratulations, Jessica. Quite an achievement. We knew you could do it. Good to see everybody. Whoops, you can't see me. Not that I'm much to look at. But do you know of Take Action Network?
Yeah, so that's a tool you can use to track bills, right? So
Oh no, it does it all.
Yeah.
It'll keep you posted of those bills and issues that you are interested in, those organizations that, you know, like Earth Ministry, that you are affiliated with and what's going on, it'll prompt you regarding the actions that you can take, and it makes it very easy to take those actions. It also keeps track of your actions and gives you kudos for that. And all you've said here tonight, very important. It's really important to give these hardworking lawmakers, feedback, positive feedback. So anyway, Take Action Network, get linked up with them, I would say.
Yeah.
Justice Wall, who I relate with, who I also work with, and Indivisible across the state.
Mhm. Yeah, so I've only heard good things. So yeah, I encourage you to check it out. I haven't played with it very much myself, but I know that it's something that many of our members use. So I encourage you to look at that. Again, also encourage you to bookmark our legislative webpage, where we'll try to be honing in on just the bills that we're working on. And I'd like to add that there's other bills on our webpage that we're following and supporting. So those budget pieces that I briefly mentioned earlier, like there's information there. There's a bill on preventing energy shutoff during heat waves. So these are things that we're tracking and we are supportive of, but given the reality of our capacity, we don't want to overextend too much. So that's why we pick our top priorities each year and then kind of have that fuller list of things that we support and are hearing about through
it even
through our
provides you
conversations.
with suggested language, which is really convenient. And of course, you get it all on a daily dashboard if you want it daily.
Wow. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
slick,
it's
man.
it
The
was
future is now.
It was developed by a Microsoft engineer. So, it's
Yeah.
quite cutting edge.
Yeah,
And
I
it's
bet.
12 years.
Yeah.
Would never go back.
Oh, okay. Well, I see Dave is asking about slides. I know I did go pretty quick there. So thank you for following along. We will get the recording up and processed. It will be on Earth Ministry WAIPL's YouTube. And we'll send that out to everybody via email. So we'll include the slides with that as well. And then, if you want to have more of a in-depth conversation about this with your faith community, that's something that Earth Ministry and WAIPL offers. We've already got quite a few booked out, even beyond my time of getting to staff them. But we're happy to keep you informed as our bills progress. I'd say overall, I feel optimistic about this slate of priorities this year. I think all of them really do have a good chance of making it through. So that's always heartening because, last year, all of our bills were first year bills last year, and it's often a multi-year process. That's just how it works. So this year we've got second year bills and we've got a long session. So it's going to be a good one. And I trust you all will be awesome, faithful advocates. And I'm grateful for how you show up in the many ways that you show up and speak your truth to power. So thank you for spending a portion of your evening with us tonight. Thank you for staying on a bit late. And you can look for that email coming from us. It'll probably be early next week, but we'll see if we can get it out sooner because things move fast in ledge session. So thank you all and blessings on the journey. Good night. Oh, Terry, good to have you here.
Bye, all. Take good care. Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you. Thanks, staff.